going to do something a little different this morning. One of the things I think a lot about, and I've been thinking a lot about since reading this book, is how incredibly inaccessible this building is. So if we didn't have a minister, for example, or a speaker, who could easily navigate stairs, what would they do on Sunday morning? You can't get up there to the pulpit if you aren't able to navigate stairs. So I wanted to think about how it might feel, right? Soren talked a little bit about how standing is equated to power, right? So for those of you who attend worship here frequently, I'd love to know how this feels for you. Is this different, having a minister sit down here? All right, I'm going to try this way, and we'll see how this goes. So first, a warm welcome to anyone who's visiting us this morning because of Malden Reads, in person or online. It's always such a joy to be able to share this program with you all. Secondly, I'm very excited this morning because this book was published by Beacon Press, which is the publishing house of the Unitarian Universalist Association, which is, we're a Unitarian Universalist congregation, so that's a really cool connection. And I think it speaks to the way that Malden Reads and the Unitarian Universalist values of this congregation align in our desire to expand understanding and belonging, something that this book does really well. Now, Sarah, our director of religious education, talked a little bit about the story of Judith Heumann, a woman whose activism, I admit, I had no idea about before reading this book. You see, despite growing up with a mother who was a teacher of the deaf, disability was never something that was at the forefront of my mind when I thought about activism, inclusivity, and belonging. My anti-oppression work has been primarily focused on LGBTQ+ activism and racial oppression, as if disability was something on the sidelines, something separate. As Judith Heumann puts it in the reading this morning, a tragedy, because that's what the media shows. Yet disability is something that impacts all of us. All of us know someone with a disability. Many of us have a disability. And even more of us will have one or more disabilities at some point in our lives. We are humans with bodies of incredible diversity, and disability is just one aspect of that. In Judy's story, she became disabled due to contracting polio when she was 18 months old, and she used a wheelchair for most of her life. And she benefited from parents who didn't follow the conventions of the time. When she recovered from polio, and it became clear that she wasn't going to walk again, the doctors advised her parents to place her in an institution. That was simply the conventional wisdom at the time. Judy's parents, Jews who left Germany and whose parents and grandparents had been killed in the Holocaust, decided against institutionalizing Judy, a decision that made a huge impact on her life. Judy's mother became an activist, and when the schools told her that Judy was a fire hazard, and Judy mentioned that she was often called a fire hazard, suddenly when there were concerns with her inclusion, they were really concerned about fire. It was her parents, along with others, who advocated for her to finally be admitted to a school, to access education when she was 9 years old. This activism, this idea that it was society that needed to change to accommodate her disability, as opposed to the other way around, not that she needed to change, this idea followed her through her life. As she got older, she got described as litigious because she often sued over the discrimination she faced. For example, the example that Sarah shared about teaching. One of the things that happened to her is she went to a doctor to pass a medical examination to become a teacher, and the doctor didn't pass the examination because she wouldn't explain to the doctor how she went to the bathroom. Another time that she was able to sue for her rights was when she was removed from an airplane for no reason other than the fact that she was traveling on her own. Unfortunately, then, as now, often the only way to guarantee enforcement of your rights is to sue, a privilege that not many of us hold. Judy's activism continues beyond this for when she advocated for the passage of Section 504, a law that stated no otherwise qualified handicapped individual in the United States shall solely by reason of their handicap be excluded from their participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to the discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Judy understood how transformative this law would be, which led to incredible activism on her part and many's like her to make this become law, and culminated in a 26-day occupation of the federal building in San Francisco with over 100 disability rights activists, most of them disabled themselves. The sit-in was hard. The government tried to starve them out, tried to make it hard for them to continue this occupation. One part of this that really stood with me is how their allies in the Black Panther Party come in and provide them food. She describes how they were cut off communication and they were able to use, as Sarah described, their secret weapon of sign language to get their message out. And that was so important to what they were doing. Something else that really impacted me in this book was that the movement was always striving for maximum inclusivity. When those that they wanted to sign the bill tried to remove the stipulation that it included those with drug and alcohol substance use disorders, Judy and her fellow activists rejected this compromise. Later, when another bill was being reauthorized that supported children with disabilities, some lawmakers wanted to remove protections for children with emotional disabilities. Yet Judy and her colleagues and fellow activists never left any group behind, which is huge. I can't tell you how many times, for example, transgender people have been left out of LGBTQ protections, for example. So it's kind of amazing to see a group united in this way. The disability movement, and in particular Judy's activism, attempted to be as expansive as possible about what constituted a disability. And that's huge, and something we can all learn from. So as I was reading this book, I could not help but think about my own life and experiences with disability. As I said earlier, it always felt like something that was separate from me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this issue was present in my life in so many ways. Let's think about accessibility, for example. This building was built in 1907, long before any protections were in place. And I think often about what it would look like to have a more accessible building. I'm sitting here today because even our pulpit is inaccessible. While I'm currently able to stand for the roughly 30 minutes or more I'm required to through a service, that might not always be the case for me or any future minister you might hire. And the pulpit conveys this sense of authority. Does it feel differently? What does it say about how we feel about how people who can't stand up there are as ministers? My office is up a flight of stairs. The building was designed with 2 separate upstairs areas that are not connected to each other. Meaning that even if we were to build an elevator, we'd have to have 2 or some way to connect them. You can't even come through our front doors if stairs are a challenge for you. I've often heard this expression, the space was created with you in mind, to be a way to talk about inclusivity. This space was clearly not created with the idea in mind that anybody but a person who could navigate stairs easily would ever work or worship here. Though people can access this space as it is today, through our ramp, through Zoom that we use with captions, through our assisted listening devices, we have a long way to go before this building and our services are truly accessible. But there were a few things in the book that hit a little bit closer to home. When Judy talks about the 26-day sit-in in the federal building, all I can manage to think is that there's no way that I could do that. Why? Because I suffer from chronic migraines and a neurological condition called trigeminal neuralgia. It causes pretty intense facial pain because I have a nerve that's being pinched at the base of my skull. And both of these conditions flare up if, say, I'm not sleeping in a bed, or I'm not getting adequate food, or I'm just generally pushing myself too hard. And I have accommodations here at the church because of it. I have this special lamp. So scientifically proven to help migraines is this green light. So I have this as one of my accommodations. I have an e-ink screen that I use because it sometimes causes me additional pain if I look at a typical computer screen too long. And I limit myself to 2 evening meetings a week because otherwise, if I start to do more, my pain starts to flare up. So all I could think is, how could these people with disabilities do this? Aha, there's some narrow thinking. Because that's implying that all people with disabilities have the same needs and limitations, which we know isn't true. Judy describes herself as someone with lots of energy. She doesn't have a chronic pain condition, so why wouldn't she be able to spend this time in the federal building? Which is not to negate how hard it was, I'm sure. But I literally couldn't. And this still feels hard and weird for me to say, but it's because I have a disability. But Judy, she was willing to fight for all people with disabilities. So shouldn't I be willing to do that for those that are not mine? I also thought a lot about my experiences as a foster parent. As some of you know, I've been a foster parent for about 5 years, and my wife and I have had several children come through our home, and most of them have had a disability, which leads me to believe that parents are not getting enough support in parenting their children with disabilities. I consider myself lucky that this congregation gave me 2 weeks of paid leave unexpectedly when my child was in the hospital a few years ago. Another parent I know whose child had been a foster child of mine was fired from her job when she had to accompany her child to a week's stay in a hospital. Furthermore, we had one child whose disability flared up 2 weeks after they arrived at our house, and the Department of Children and Families' first response was, "You don't have to keep them. We can take them away." We never said we wanted that, but that was the assumption. We had to fight to keep that kid in our house. The first thought was that this child should be institutionalized, like it had been for Judy's parents 75 years ago, or bounced around. And we didn't do that, and now the child is thriving where they are. We've had kids who have experienced discrimination and a lack of understanding in school, a child who was held back when she didn't need to be, another who was punished severely and suspended despite, if not because of, having a disability. All of this to say that things haven't changed that much since Judy's time. But I do have to say, at least we have something to fall back on. Something to support these kids needing accommodations in order to access education. The knowledge that this is something that we do have to work on. This understanding that disabilities are a part of life and a part of the diversity of what it means to be a human being. Without Judy's work, we wouldn't have 504 and the subsequent American for Disabilities Act. But that doesn't mean that the work stops. I encourage you to think about the places in your lives where you can make changes, perhaps in your workspace or your home. I encourage you to think beyond the way that I did, that disability is not something that is separate from who you are, but interwoven in all of these other aspects of our lives. I want you to think about the ways that disability touches your lives, maybe in unexpected ways, maybe because you have a disability yourself or somebody that you love does. Let us work to create that world that Judith Heumann imagines, where no one says, "I wish I didn't have a disability," where the spaces we make are designed with you in mind. May it be so. Let us say together, Amen. Amen.